Welcome back, everybody, to the daily update on the Malazan world. And, well, I guess it's not daily at the moment because I didn't make a video yesterday. Today's video is also going to be more disorganized than usual. I know that's a challenge, but I feel up to it. And the reason is that I don't know, have a lot of stuff to do right now, and I didn't feel like doing a video yesterday, and well, we're gonna be back today with another video on the first book of Memories of Ice, and I'll try to do my best, so let's go. Cheers. Alright, there's also no cool knitting today because I didn't get to knit anything. I spent an inordinate amount of time with packing vinyl records, which takes more time than you might think because you need to take out the actual record in the inner sleeve and to avoid seam splits on the cardboard box around it. So you take them out and put all of those together in like a plastic PVC sleeve, and yeah, so yeah, I spent my day doing that today and yesterday, so I couldn't actually do any knitting at the time. But I listened to Memories of Ice while doing that. And now, since I don't take notes, I need to do the video before I forget what I thought about when I was doing the video. So I hope I won't forget too much, but yeah, as I said, I'm disorganized and a fool. So there's going to be even more rambly than usual. I just, put up some things that I found interesting in chapters, I don't know, 3, 4, something like that, mostly. There's like a few, of the shorter side notes and stuff like that, and a few bigger ones. So let's start with something that I realized it's not exactly that important. I feel like I've got to do some more talking about it later and when it becomes more important, I feel. And that's when Quickben goes to meet that priestess of Burn. Or is she just a priestess? We don't know. And I found it very interesting, like the concept that the priestess then tells that old sorceress, then tells him like about everything being integrated and so forth, like the plants, the animals, the beings, like being one big being, like about the concept of the cosmos and the world. And the reason why I found this interesting is that I also read Stephen Erickson's Rejoice, that sci-fi book slash political pamphlet or whatever you want to call it. And yeah, I did actually enjoy it, is what I'm trying to say here. But one thing that comes up there a lot is the idea of the Gaia hypothesis, and it's talked about there a lot, and it sort of means the same thing. So I feel like we can, in this discussion that Quickban has there with the sorceress, we see something resembling that idea of the Gaia hypothesis and of the entire biosphere of a planet being basically a kind of macro being or whatever, an organism in like something analogous to an organism in itself, and thus being super vulnerable. We can see that here in the way that Burns' sickness and the idea of the entire planet and everyone involved there being basically also one organism or part of that goddess in this case, I guess. What is what I'm trying to say? And as I said, I'm not gonna go into the idea of that the whole Gaia hypothesis kind of thing. I'm not a scientist. I have not read that. Oh, well, kind of a scientist, like, not about those kind of things. So I haven't read the book either, like the Gaia hypothesis book, and I don't know anything about that. I just found it interesting to see that basically what Stephen Erickson spent relatively large, like at least a longer discussion within Rejoice on that topic. He also kind of spends a long-ish discussion there between Quickben and that sorceress slash priestess slash whatever. And once again, I feel at some point I really need to talk about the idea of gods versus ascendants versus religion within the Malazan world, but I don't think today is the day to do that. So yeah, there was that thing I just wanted to talk about real quick. I guess it would be interesting to have a comment from Stephen Erickson on that topic, but otherwise, I feel it's an interesting thing to see those parallels between Rejoice and this and the Miles and Book of the Fallen there. All right. Another thing that I found interesting, well, I mean, really cool is that description when you see Tool teaching Tuck the Younger how to make arrows in a in the Talan Imas way, where really the whole idea of archaeology comes through, and experimental archaeology, I guess, also where people try to recreate or figure out on an experimental level how to do certain things in certain Neolithic or Paleolithic ways. And I mean, I'm not an expert. I kind of assume from what that the IMAS technological level is somewhere around the Paleolithic era, from what I see, is like, or maybe Neolithic, basically somewhere with like old Stone Age technology is what I'm trying to say there, and the descriptions of how he makes those arrows are just like so very very detailed. I don't know. My inner nerd just like really nerded out on that, and I just enjoyed that a lot. So take that for what it's worth. It's just cool. What else about that? I think, as I said, just like small random bits right now, and that I found like really just a cool description of how to do that. And from what I know, it's very close to how the like how we think those things were made. So that's just like you learn something while reading that, like something that you can now use to impress non-archaeologists at parties once we have parties again, I suppose. Anyway, what else? A very snide comment that Ganoa's Paran makes when he's going to get told that there is like he has to find something out, that kind of quest. I think it's Paran who says quests are for wall-eyed heroes in epic poems, and that one I just found like a really cool aside, because quests are something that yes happens in epic poems when you look back at your, I don't know, your Beowulfs or your Odysseys or what have you, your Gilgamesh, or even your Kalevala or whatever. The interesting part though is that a lot of those structures then obviously came into fantasy fiction and fantasy literature afterwards, obviously, because what Tolkien did was create a mythology for his fictitious languages, and thus oriented his stories way more along the lines of epic poems or epic and mythology, and epic poems just being one way of of narrating mythology, like for a long time, because epic poems, I guess, our poems are easier to remember and such. So in an oral tradition, it's easier to do historiography or write historiography or any kind of narration in a poetic style, so you can remember it easier. And that's basically what you then get in your even your high medieval epic poems, like your Nibelungenlied or Song of Roland and stuff like that. Even then, and those are then like the blueprint for what Tolkien does when he writes his story, like the structure of that kind of quest and being on that quest kind of thing happens, like then translates into what Tolkien does. And then a large part of what Tolkien does then obviously has a huge impact on fantasy fiction for the next 50, 60 years, whether positively or negatively. It's people, for a large part of the fantasy culture, even the fantasy game, like role-playing game, whatever culture, then defines itself for a long time by either emulating Tolkien or purposefully trying to not emulate and deconstruct Tolkien. That's something that you have for large parts. Like, I mean, the sword and sorcery system, which is arguably even more influential when it comes to like pen and paper role playing games in a way, is like largely ignored in the more like theoretical discussion for a long time. But when you look at it until, I don't know, like the 90s, 2000s, like basically every science, not every, but a large part of fantasy literature and fantasy critique also is basically comparing stuff to Tolkien and either saying, yeah, it's great that this is not like Tolkien, or saying, yeah, it's great because it's exactly like Tolkien. So having that aside, that quests are just for epic poems, and in like, you know, extension to that, also just like what happens in fantasy stories, just like a, you know, interesting comment. And you can compare that to for example, Stephen Erickson has said at some points, at several points, basically, that Tolkien was not an influence for him as not a huge influence when he started reading fantasy, because it was more sword and sorcery and the Black Company and stuff like that. So having that aside there is one of those more I don't know. I don't want to call it a meta level comment, but it's kind of on that way. And yeah, I kind of enjoy those asides there, because I don't know. I've said it before. I also enjoy stuff like Terry Pratchett, who makes a lot of comments on that in that direction as well. Much more openly comment on fantasy literature in general. But you know, I just felt like mentioning that would be an interesting thing to look at. What else? That discussion about what happened inside the sword and the holds versus houses versus whatever came before kind of thing. That's a really interesting discussion that Tattersale slash now Silver Fox has with Paran there, which once again I feel kind of shows this more like deep time, maybe influenced by actual knowledge in archaeology and anthropology kind of thing in there, because the idea that you have houses and before that you have holds, which correspond to more primitive dwellings in human history in a way. And before that, when you had still nomadic people, you had something before that, and thus darkness, being oldest of those basically holds kind of things, is not actually a hold, but is actually moving around all the time, which corresponds to the gate to darkness, possibly being inside the sword, inside Dragnipur. The way that's like reconstructed in that discussion is just very, very interesting. It obviously also opens the question, if darkness is always on the move and is like the thing that came before holds were like not invented, but impressed on the fabric of reality there, basically. What came before darkness, or what is that fabric that darkness is then like moving on or moving about? And that's kind of a question that we don't want to get into here right now, but just wanted to say that I found that very interesting, how that is just like the discussion there, how it is like sort of built up, is great. Also, it's interesting in a way because this is sort of not like your average info dump kind of thing in a lot of fantasy books, where you get all of that dropped on you and then it's fact of like the world. But we have two people actually just speculating there, and none of them actually knows if that is true or not. Although obviously Silver Fox has not hopefully, but theoretically a rather better source of knowledge there, because obviously one of the souls in intertwined in the soul of Silver Fox is obviously Nightchill, who, as we have figured out by now, is sister of Cold Night, one of those elder gods that was there from pretty early on. So she might actually know more about that than your average cadre mage or chosen against his will kind of important person like Ganoa's Paran. But yeah, still, the way that was unfolded was just like really cool and stuck out to me, and I just found that very, very interesting. All right, what else? There was one sentence I can't remember anymore, which I found really, really interesting while reading it. It was about Anomander Rake, and I'll try to go back and figure out what I meant there, why it stuck out to me when I read it, and I'll try to put it into like the next video, which will be about the rest of book 1 of Memories of Ice. But until then, I'll just have to put that aside. It was just something which I found very poetic about Rake in a situation where he wasn't there, and just a description about him. But I need to, like as I said, my mind is very much like a sieve these days, and I don't know what that was. Well, what else do we need to talk about? We need to talk about the Maybe, and or however you pronounce that. And I have that's something that's going to be ongoing through this book, I suspect. For me, the first 2 times around, I expected not to shift too much for this one. The parts about the Maybe are extremely difficult to read, extremely emotionally difficult, taxing to read. I feel there's an interesting video in itself in there about this kind of thing. But first of all, like we get a lot of her inner dialogue, and which makes like the Maybe part sometimes similarly difficult to read, like some of the Felicin parts in Deadhouse Gates, where we also have her inner suffering and brokenness in there, and that's something which I guess makes it kind of difficult. But on the other hand, like, okay, so what I want think is the part we need to talk about the Maybe now is the whole idea of her sacrificing herself, her life force, like quite literally forcing her, like sacrificing her life to let Tattersail / Nightchill / Rests of Baladan, Silver Fox, grow. And the interesting bit there is that she sacrifices herself quite literally to give her child the chance to grow that quickly. And you know what? You could read that. I'm not saying you should. I don't think that's exactly how you should read how it is meant to be. But you can read the whole Tattersail Maybe relationship as a very, very typical example for a certain kind of toxic relationship, in a way, where you have one person in a relationship sacrificing their everything to that other person's growth and success and so forth, and the other person, well, in this case, and this is the sad part, is like Silver Fox realizes that she's hurting her mother in that situation. She realizes that at some point, like relatively early on. But also she cannot actually do anything about it, right? That's what makes it so toxic, is like they're bound together in that situation, and it's literally impossible from what we've learned so far. Maybe there's a situation or a point at which Silver Fox could consciously stop drawing energy and life force from the Maybe. I don't know. It's never like mentioned clearly, at least not so far. Yeah, they're bound together, and one of them is destroying the other, whether she wants that or not. Now we can assume that Tattersail, I always want to say Tattersail, but it's Silver Fox. That Silver Fox doesn't want to kill the Maybe. We can assume that. And it's relatively clear that she doesn't want that, because we know that it hurts her to realize that she's hurting the Maybe. We know that. but there seems to be no way out for her but to actually hurt her by taking her life force away. On the other hand, we have the Maybe, who mostly, at least in most situations so far, this might change, is like has taken on this role more or less willingly. So she's not, she's obviously not happy with her lot, but she has accepted that. And acceptance is very, very important there. Now you remember that quote from Felice in Dead House Gates about rape, when she's like, it's all about acquiescence. And the Maybe definitely has acquiesced at some point during that soul shifting ritual thing that happened during Gardens of the Moon. I suspect that she was aware of what she did and what giving birth to a child like Silver Fox would do to her life and her life force. She's not, at least she doesn't feel, we never hear that she feels tricked into actually having done this. But still, it's her struggling with that role and her struggling with her sacrifice is some of the most painful reading I've ever done in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, at least. And it's very, very difficult, emotionally difficult to read those parts. I'm obviously going to do it, and I feel there's a lot of stuff to learn in there. But it's not fun to read it. It's not your blend and picker and ambush traders kind of fun or whatever, what have you. It's just very, very heart-wrenching, is I guess the word you would use there. Yeah. What else was important? Well, a cool scene with the stealing of the card table and then returning it and so forth. That's, was just well done. Kinda, it reminded me of these like more like fun episodes of actually like Black Company in a way, but also some of these like coming of age stories, that like books where you have like school kids playing these stupid pranks and that kind of thing, which was fun. It obviously served a purpose. We see that Ganos Paran is something more and something way more complicated now. He's once again has a role thrust upon him. At least somewhat thrust upon him. So far, he has not accepted that role yet. So he seems to have at least a little agency in that regard. Yeah, we learn more about the whole idea of the deck of the dragons, how it represents certain forms of power and how that connection there, which will be explored more. There's one thing in there that I feel is very interesting later on. I'll probably talk about that in another video. I want to do a video on like mythology, parallels between mythology and like real world mythology and the Malazan Book of the Fallen at some point. And there's something coming up real soon that I definitely need to put in there. What else do we have? That discussion that Gruntle has with the other caravan guard, and I've forgotten his name already. I need to look it up again. The one who has his death wish. That's the one. The idea of him having that death wish and trying to get killed because of his way of coming to terms with his personal grief is a sad thing, but still it's something that, I don't know, makes him a character sort of likable. I found it okay. So there's an interesting thing there that I'll try to say a few words now on, and then I'll do another video where I talk about it in more detail later on, because the idea that he's on this death wish and is this dark, slightly dark person with this dark past and grief and so forth makes him almost like this, like, sort of archetype of grimdarker fantasy that a lot of people romanticize in a way. And the fact that Stoney obviously feels attracted to him, maybe not because of his like death wish part, but certainly that seems to play a part in there, and the idea of this being able to save someone kind of thing in there. What I loved about it is the fact that apparently the way it's portrayed shows in a very, in my experience, very realistic way how a lot of people are unable to verbalize their emotional states properly. I mean, I will never I count myself among those people who are totally unable to verbalize their emotional states. But so yeah, I just found that very interesting and very touching in a way, to have those people who are basically, especially Stoney, who's basically incapable of like actually verbalizing this in a way that, works, and Gruntless even commenting on that. So I found that touching because it felt very, very real in its. I'm lacking words today. It felt very, very real in the ungainly way that everyone is handling things there. In its awkwardness, I would say. That felt very, very real. All right, I guess that's it for today, because as I said, I just have a lot going on in my mind at the moment, and I need to figure those things out, and also maybe make actual notes when I try to talk about the rest of book 1 tomorrow. So yeah, I'll leave you with this, and until then, cheers.